So, welcome all, and thank you for joining us today for a roundtable discussion presented by Sentinel One and AWS. Today's topic is talking to the board about cloud security. According to the 2021 Global CISO Survey, 90% of CISOs present directly to their organization's board. Today, we're going to talk about how security leaders can demonstrate the value of investing in security, how best to align security programs to business outcomes, and effective strategies for communicating cloud security risk to the board. My name is Jeremy Goldstein, the moderator of today's discussion, and I'm joined today by my esteemed panelists, Clark Rogers and Rick Bosworth. Gents, could you tell me a little bit about yourselves?
Hey there, Clark Rogers. I'm a enterprise strategist with AWS. For those of you not familiar with the enterprise strategy team, we're former CIOs, CTOs, and I'm a former CISO who led a transformational change, including a cloud adoption at our previous companies prior to coming to AWS. I've been with AWS now for a little over 5 years and have spent the majority of my career in cybersecurity in both financial services and the insurance sectors.
And I'm Rick Bosworth, Director of Product Marketing with Sentinel One. I've been here for about a year and a half, focused on cloud workload protection. I have been in the cloud security game for right at 4 years now.
So, speaking to the board about cloud security, that's why we're all here today. So, just kind of kicking us off, what recommendations do you have for being prepared for that conversation?
Oh no, Clark, do you want to kick us off there?
Sure. So I think one of the key things to remember as a security leader that while you know security very well, the board or other senior leadership may not. So the most effective thing you can do is to be able to communicate in terms of business and business risk versus the bits and bytes of security. And part of that is being prepared to do some research on the board itself, the organization that you're a part of, as well as the industry, the greater industry that you're a part of. Because oftentimes boards are interested, they read something in the news like this competitor or this other company just got hit with ransomware or something like that. So you have to understand what they care about and be prepared to talk to those topics in detail. And again, from a business risk perspective, sometimes, it's the little things that give you the credibility of not only a security professional, but as well as an executive. And that's things like reading the 10K, understanding how your company makes money and what line of business you're really in, how to read a profit and loss statement, and then learning a little bit about your board members and perhaps what other boards that they're on, right? And get a broader idea of what other industries and threats that they may be exposed to in those other board roles.
Yeah, and I guess I would just build on that by saying, with regards to their experience, just jumping back and jumping up a level of abstraction is know your room. Certainly know their experience, where they've been, what boards they're participating on, what groups, what working groups, but also any press related to them. Get to know that this will help you understand how they frame and attack problems, I think. Also, I would recommend being crystal clear before you walk into the room on what your why is. And that's also what their perception of your why is as you walk in there. And, above all else, anticipate questions and be prepared to answer those questions when they come to you as the subject matter expert.
And what role do you think security frameworks play in that preparation? How do you go about selecting a framework and measuring yourself against those frameworks? How do you go about benchmarking security in that context?
So I think it's important to align to a framework, but I don't think it's particularly important to align to a particular one. Some industries that varies, where you must align with a certain framework. But for the most part, I meet with north of 150 enterprise customers a year, and we talk about this at great length. For the most part, you need to align with something that you can benchmark from. So even if it's something as simple as the CIS top 20, and I say simple, I rarely see organizations who have actually mastered the CIS top 20, and that's typically considered a quote unquote basic framework. But if you can at least align with something like that, And then you can get, peer data from third-party sources, or maybe from some of the organizations that you participate in as a CISO. When that board asks you, well, how are we doing for our industry? You should be able to answer them, right? Or here is a competitor that something bad happened to or something great happened to. How do we align with them, right? Because oftentimes that's what boards and senior leadership teams are interested in. So to summarize, pick one, but it may not be that important to pick a specific one to align with.
Yeah, just building on that, though, the one thing I would add is that's knowing how we stack up to the framework that's of particular importance to our industry, and then how we stack up to our competition. I would almost guarantee that's not the reason why you were brought into the room to speak to the board, but it does seem like one of those questions you can reasonably expect, and therefore should be ready to respond like that so you can get back on message.
And there was a study by Capgemini that said that 60% of organizations have their CISO at key board meetings, but only half of business executives think the role has a high level of influence on management decisions. From what you've seen, do security leaders, even have the opportunity to speak to the board today?
I think it really varies. I have the opportunity, like I said, to speak to a lot of customers every year. Some of them are very advanced, large enterprises. Some of them are startups, and then there's everything in between. At the most positive end, I see CISOs having a strong relationship with the board, reporting to them, 4 times a year, have good personal relationships with some of the subcommittees like the audit committee or the risk committee, and really are looked at as peers from not only a board, but from an executive perspective. On the way other end of things, I still see CISOs who not only don't have any exposure to the senior leadership team, much less the board, but are often, 5 minutes of an hour presentation that either the CIO or CTO gives in sort of a state of the union of IT to a particular set of senior leaders. So it's all over the map, but the trend seems to be now that CISOs are getting that face time at minimum with senior leadership, at minimum, and then more frequently at the board, but we typically see it at the audit and risk subcommittee more often than we do to the entire board.
And based on those characteristics, are there, is it the security culture? Is it the posture of the organization? What kind of determines, whether CISOs are even in the room for those conversations?
I think it absolutely aligns with the strength of the security culture and how important security is to that particular business or organization. When you see CEOs who are constantly reaching out to the CISO and having one-on-one meetings and really want to understand what their risk posture is, not only from a cyber perspective, but the associated business risk that comes along with that, you tend to see more involvement from the CISO. Specifically, I can talk to AWS. Our CISO, Stephen Schmidt, meets with our CEO, Adam Solipsky, once a week. And that's a luxury that a lot of CISOs don't have. But when you have an organization that focuses on security as strongly as we do, you have to have that relationship, you have to have that trust, and you have to have that visibility from both the CEO and the CISO.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, especially for your business, AWS. I mean, customer trust is paramount to AWS's ability to deliver. So security, and maybe AWS are not entirely unique in that regard. I mean, customer trust, it doesn't matter if you're in the business of infrastructure as a service or candy bars. I mean, the ability to keep the customer data secure, customers have that trust, they're willing to do that business. I can't remember what it was you said, Clark, that really punctuated this thought in my mind, but it had something to do with the spectrum and how culture varies. The one thing I've noticed in interacting with CISOs is that, maybe for larger organizations, the CISOs, although they may have grown up in front of a keyboard and 5 monitors, now recognize that they're executives and they're comfortable walking that walk. But more often than not, for the smaller or maybe even sometimes with the medium-sized organizations, I see the CISOs are still very comfortable sitting in front of that keyboard and pounding on that keyboard, but less so in the executive boardroom. So I'm hoping that through proper preparation and learning what is of interest to an executive level audience, the CISO in that type of organization will be able to elevate and meet their customer, in this case, the board, where they are.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I still see a lot of hands-on CISOs, which is not a bad thing, as long as they can also, if they can equally communicate down to the developers and the security ops people, and then also communicate equally effectively up to the board and senior leadership in a business and risk context, I think it's absolutely fine. But I definitely see what you're talking about. And it's all about, in my opinion, is making sure that that CISO understands that the reason he or she is in that role is not to expand their security empire and be the Department of No and invest millions in every security tool that's out there. Their role is to reduce the risk and articulate the risk to the decision makers within the organization so they can make better business decisions.
Amen.
While time for security is increasing, the board's time is precious and limited. How do you make the most of that time when you're in the room?
You have to maximize the time when you're not in the room, right? So I have several CISO customers who send out, and it sounds kind of corny and third grade-ish, but it works. They send out routine newsletters, for lack of a better word, to the board members and your senior leadership team that just sort of says, here's what's going on, and here's the state of security, and here's some new investment we made, or here's the new program we're rolling out. So that for that little time that they do have with the executives, excuse me, at a board meeting, it's not, let's learn about the CISO or let's learn about these larger programs. It allows the board members, if they read the newsletters clearly, to sort of reduce it and be able to focus on the things that matters to them. And they don't have to get into the minutia of some of these other programs that the CISO might be running.
Yeah, so just netting that out, if I heard you right, Clark, it's just all about developing those relationships outside of the room. And then, did I hear you right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because you have such a finite time with them in person at the quarterly board meeting or whatever it is, don't waste the other 365 days of the year in developing a relationship with your board and senior leadership team.
Yes, absolutely. And knowing that time is such a precious resource, just keep it in mind, your audience and their needs. I think you said it, they care about the business results, not about the technical minutia. So really keep your message simple, keep it crisp and to the point. If they ask technical questions, yes, be ready. You're the subject matter expert. Come bring those to the table. But I will keep that signal to noise ratio high, and I wouldn't give them any more information than what they ask for. In other words, don't do a great job of creating more questions. Answer the ones that is asked.
And how do you recommend CISOs go about making the ask for the incremental investment, whether it's for cloud security programs or just security programs in general, right? Making the ask, to your point, Clark, it's not about, signing up every security vendor under the planet and spending millions of dollars, right? But the reality is those situations do arise. Vendor management is a huge, component of security these days. But how do you recommend those CISOs go about making that ask for investment?
So it really comes down to the business risk that you're reducing by a program that you're trying to put into place, right? So when you're asking for money or people or whatever the case may be, it should be phrased in such a way of reducing the risk of a certain line of business, for example, that the board is very familiar with, and be prepared to frame that risk in dollars and cents, as well as reputational risk or some of the other elements of risk that are out there, and just show that if I'm permitted to proceed with Project X, the end result will reduce the overall risk of product line Y, et cetera, et cetera. So framing it in terms of a business that they can understand.
Absolutely. And, just taking a step back from that, Clark, I would almost say you want to capture their attention and focus it right at the onset. So have a story lined up that's going to lead to your ask. And that's that crisp, well-rehearsed elevator pitch. It's not a long soliloquy. I don't know if it's 30 seconds, 1 minute, or 2 minutes, but it's constrained and it's going to describe the problem to be solved, why it matters to the business, and therefore by extension them, and what's it going to cost, and then what's going to be the return. And then you might have a story and you frame it around recent Linux ransomware attacks that hit your competitors, and the audience will be, of course, well versed in what that means to your competitor's business. And then you tell them, okay, to mitigate this risk, because we're never going to zero out risk, but we can manage that risk. To your point, I'm asking for X dollars that will have a payback over Y months and provide a Z ROI percentage. And I've had this happen too, Clark. I've walked into the room and I've asked for, $1 million. And then, they've said, well, what happens if I give you 2?
Right. Yeah, you should definitely think through the different scenarios in your mind if you're either wildly successful or not successful enough, what you can actually bring to the table with the resources you're provided.
So there's the pain and the risk that we're mitigating. I think also I would, you mentioned dollars and cents. Since we're coming to the table with a proposal, I want to have a business case behind that proposal. So I want to tell them, okay, this is the investment. This is how much it's going to cost you. This is what that cash outlay looks like over time. Is it all upfront? Is it annual payments over 3 years? I don't know. And then look at the other side of the ledger, which would be the benefits. Okay, we're going to spend this money and we're going to accrue these benefits. I don't know, in terms of SOC productivity or reduced number of incidents or reduced time to respond to an incident, whatever that benefit might look like. And then work out the discounted cash flow analysis to provide, this is my payback period in months, hopefully not years. And this is my ROI, and this is our net present value.
Yeah, I would caution a little bit, however. Again, when you're speaking at the broad swath of CISOs and types of organizations that are out there, some organizations are so very mature and have good approval frameworks in place that if you've made it to the board and you're still asking for money, something may have gone terribly wrong, as opposed to asking for your money at the senior leadership level. Right. But all the points you made are absolutely valid. It's just, again, it kind of depends on the size of your organization and the maturity of your organization and your reporting structure.
That makes sense.
And I think as much as it is, asking for investment to do something, I think also illustrating what's the cost of doing nothing, right? Is it, let's say an incident happens. Is it, a loss of trust? Is it your customers, your employees, your partners, that now don't have faith in you as an organization? Is it, reputational damage? And sometimes that's, not recoverable, right? Is it impairment to your business, right? If you're in the candy bar business, the factory stops running. And all of that creates a great sense of financial headwinds, and also, regulatory scrutiny. We talked about frameworks, right, in highly regulated industries. If you're dealing with costly audits and having the auditors poking around, that's not only going to cost you money, but it's going to take you away from doing what you need to do, to focus on doing audit. But more importantly, answering the question, why now, right? So there's a cost for doing nothing, there's a cost for doing something, but, what's the urgency, why now? And really making it very crystal clear as to, what the driving business need behind this project is. While we're on the topic of the business case, both of you shared some really, cogent insights there. Is there any specific order you recommend presenting the business case in? What do you really lead with for the most impact?
My experience, your mileage may vary. I mean, it really depends upon the room. And I've even had the case where I presented multiple times to the exact same room. And I thought I learned from the first experience and I modified that and we reversed course. And what am I trying to say? You can never fully anticipate the script of how it's going to go. This is a dynamic conversation, so you have to be prepared to read and react to what's happening in the room. Sometimes it's money first. Other times, it's wait a minute. Let's talk about the pain again. I thought I was clear on that. Let's reverse, and then we'll get into the money. But in every situation that I've been in front of the C-suite or even the board, the questions have always begun on the first slide. So it's not like I'm going to prepare this well-rehearsed script, although I am ready. And I'm going to go in there and I'm going to tell my story and I'm going to dazzle everybody and they're going to shower my team with money. I always begin with the elevator pitch. And that's not salesmanship. What that is, it's helping the audience prepare to receive the information that I'm giving them, to activate their imagination and create a mental framework on which they can hang the information that I'm providing. So the answer is, it depends.
Yeah, and I'm afraid I have to say the same thing. It all depends on, you have to understand the room, you have to understand the business context you're in, the environment you're in, what just happened the day before in the news that may have nothing to do with this, right?
Right.
But beyond all that, it's, from my opinion and discussions with lots of CISOs, it's lead with the risk that you've identified and how you're going to solve that problem if you get what you're asking for or whatever plan you're about to put in place.
We talked about frameworks, we talked about business case and presenting the investment side. How do you go about building metrics around your security program that kind of illustrate the value that investing in security means, right? Like, not necessarily focusing again on the technical side of it, but what are those metrics that security leaders should be armed with when they are having those conversations with the board?
One thing that's popping out for me is I always think of security as an enabler of the business. And the first thing, having spent, a few years in cloud security, and cloud is always about accelerating business agility. So I always think of cloud security in terms of enabling that agility. So I'm going to be looking at a trend history of incidents over time, but I might even do a normalization factor of software delivery, and then normalize that to security incidents that would then help shape a story of, okay, security is not in the way, but we are in lockstep with the business and we are enabling them to go fast and safe at the same time.
Yeah, I would agree that aligning it to something tangible like product or software delivery is the best way to go about it. And then being able to support it with different security metrics within there. Typically, as we see more and more organizations moving to the cloud and adopting CI/CD for their security stack, DevSecOps, all the lovely terms out there, you should be able to show over time, this is how long it used to take to deliver a new feature set in product X. Since we've streamlined and automated these 50 things, many of those are security related because it might be something like a templatized AMI that has all your security controls in the EC2 instance. It may be certain vulnerability assessments and scanning that happens through the CI/CD process. You should be able to show that, the rework that needs to be done for security or compliance reasons gets reduced over time because of the automation that's put in place, right? And that's how you can show value from a security perspective to the actual business outcomes.
Beautiful.
Great. Thanks again to Rick and Clark for their time today. It was a great discussion between two people I really respect. I think, a lot of the points we talked about today is getting the CISO out of the basement and into the boardroom. So, with that, are there any, closing thoughts you have there, Clark?
Yeah, so first, thanks again for having me today. I really appreciate it. The the thing that I'd love the viewers to take away is remember, as I mentioned earlier in the talk, we're there as CISOs and security professionals to help lower the risk of the organization. And if you don't have the business acumen, if you don't know how your company makes money, what's important to the board, what the overall industry is that you're in, competitors, et cetera, you're not going to be as effective as the type of CISO who can do all those things. So, security is a tool to help reduce risk. So you have to be able to talk in terms of business. So thank you.
Yeah, Clark, and it's been a pleasure speaking with you today. And Jeremy, thank you for having me here as well. I couldn't agree more with what you said, Clark. But finally, I just wanted to extend an invitation to our audience that, if you're struggling with securing your cloud workloads, please don't hesitate to reach out. SentinelOne.com, hit that contact us button whenever you're ready. We're happy to entertain a conversation with you about the challenges you're experiencing in going fast and secure.
And with that, we'll open up the Q&A. If you have questions, please use the chat panel in Zoom, and we will address your questions live.
So any question? It's all good, and you can put your questions in the Q&A, and we won't name you. So don't be shy. Okay, see one coming up. So interesting question. You mentioned there's a good portion of CISOs who don't get in front of the board. How do you navigate to insert yourself there? Two things immediately come to mind. One, you might not have to insert yourself. You might be summoned. And Jeremy, I think you were alluding to research earlier that mentions that more and more CISOs are getting airtime, not only with the C-suite, of which they certainly are, but by the C-suite, I'm talking about the CEO, CIO, CFO, but also the board of directors. So if you're not summoned, certainly go up through your management chain, begin with your upline, and if you find yourself with a topic that will be of pertinence to the board, your CEO will certainly let you know that. How does S1, SentinelOne, that's shorthand, address XDR? Is this your main focus? So when we talk about XDR, we're talking about see, protect, and respond to incidents that are surfacing from across your attack surface. So it's not just user workstations or user endpoints. It's also cloud workloads, network devices, email, so on and so forth. So XDR is a prime focus. You will be hearing much more from us in the coming weeks as we ramp up our engine there. But yeah, thanks for the question. What metrics do you find are of most interest to the board? Clark, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So again, I hate to always answer with it depends, but it truly does depend across industry and the maturity of the board itself. But some metrics that we do see being more effective are metrics along the lines of profit and loss and dollars and framing risk in those terms across lines of business that the board is probably more familiar with than whether you're hitting a certain technology or cybersecurity metric along patching or viruses or stopping attacks and things like that. The other metric that is of interest to boards, especially as organizations are moving more to the cloud and using automation and CI/CD pipeline, is how effective is security being at inserting itself in that CI/CD pipeline and reducing the overall risk to a particular product or service that, software product or service that's being launched. Those are coming up quite frequently.
Hey, Clark, I saw another question come in that you might like to answer. They're interested in tapping your experience with the diversity of companies that you interact with. What percentage of the boards are adding cyber expertise?
Well, we don't actually have data on that because a lot of board activities are, I guess, more secretive, for lack of a better word. But I would say in a general trend, I'm starting to see more and more quote unquote cyber experts being put on boards. Unfortunately, with that trend comes a little more headache for the CISO, because what you typically see is, or what you sometimes see is, the cybersecurity expert who's on the board tries to show up for the board and give a gotcha question to the CISO, and may or may not be that helpful. But I don't have strong statistics around that. But thank you for your question.
Hey, Jeremy, I see a question around zero trust. You're our resident zero trust expert. You want to take a swing at that one?
Sure, let me see this in the chat.
How can I position zero trust to a board so they understand it has dollars associated to it?
That would depend on what it depends is the theme, I think, for today, but it would depend really on what industry you're in. I mean, with the Biden executive order that just passed, if you go anything near federal and touch federal at all, I think it's in your best interest to be positioning zero trust to the board. But yeah. Any thoughts on zero trust, Clark?
Zero trust, I think, is a interesting topic because there are so many different definitions of it. So I think the first step is to, in that idea of being communicative and as an educational point of view with your boards, is to educate them on what your view of zero trust is, just to make sure that you're setting the landscape correctly. And then show that, zero trust, there is not a single tool out there that all of a sudden you are zero trust. It's several different mechanisms across the security stack that one must implement to achieve zero trust. So I think getting that across, because again, depending on where your board gets their news from, or senior leadership gets their news from, they may think that there's a magic button they can hit or pay for, and all of a sudden they have zero trust, which is not the case.
Right. Building on that, Clark, I even followed that advice earlier during the Q&A. Somebody had a question around XDR, and I level set to begin answering the question by defining what XDR means to me and SentinelOne before I even answered the question.
Yep.
Next question I'd like to take a stab at. What level of detail should you use in communication with the board? Because you need to strike a balance between being too techy and too basic. 100% agree. You don't want to be too techy unless you're invited to, by the nature of the question, to provide those technical details. I would strongly recommend that your answers be tight. As we mentioned during the webinar, anticipate questions, spend some time thinking about what questions might come your way, and just know the ground you're standing on, know your content. You can't anticipate every possible question, but you bring a lot of expertise, and that's why you're being invited to speak to the board. Now, understand you need to up-level your message. Don't come at it from a keyboard perspective. Come at it from a business perspective. And Clark and I were talking about that early on during the presentation, about understand what makes your business tick, because that's what the board cares about, and that's what they want you to look at through that lens. Look at security through the lens of what it means for your business.
And just to add on, you may only meet with the board twice a year or 4 times a year, but that doesn't mean you can't develop a relationship with the board members outside of those times. So find a mechanism that you can engage with them, so that you start to understand what what level is right for them. Are they going to ask me a gotcha question? Are they really interested in the deep dive into the tech, or can you elevate things? So, take it upon yourself to actually reach out and develop that relationship with the board as well.
You can always apply a business case analysis for the board. NPV, ROI, yes, this will justify your ask. Absolutely. And this came up in the Q&A earlier. Make sure that the assumptions behind your business case are defensible. Do not put your thumbs on the scales in the attempt to make your business case look too attractive. You're not there to deceive anyone. You're there to be the subject matter experts, the representative of security and risk management for the business. They want to hear from you. They don't need you to sell stories. Cool. I see we're still at 65 attendees. That tells me there's some latent questions laying out there. So I'm just going to give it a few more moments before we call it.
People have figured out their boards, Rick.
I think so. They no longer need us, Clark. I don't know. As a financial geek, I'm so inspired to see that comment in the chat being the last one around a business case talking about NPV and ROI. Almost everybody knows who ROI is, right? But I can give you 1,000% ROI if we just start from 1 cent or $1. I think what's more meaningful is NPV, or net present value, and that's what how your security project is expanding the value of the business. And I think that ties back to what the perspective or that lens where we were talking about speaking to the board about security through that business lens and how we're expanding the value. Any other closing thoughts to my esteemed panelists?
I think, again, it's just a matter of getting the up-leveling cybersecurity to be an executive topic and a business topic, and making sure that you're there to play the game and to insert yourself in key business decisions, because security for the more advanced organizations who really get it is a business enabler.
Excellent. Well, Clark, Jeremy, it's been a pleasure being with you today. Thank you to our audience for joining us. Really appreciate all your questions. If you'd like to continue the conversation, you can find us on LinkedIn. You could also find us on Twitter. I'm sure it's a digital world, and I'm certainly not bashful about sharing my opinions. So again, thank you so much.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye now.